Life is a mystery, unfolded by time. As I stand here, peering through my eyes, what lies outside matters little compared to the inner landscape of my mind. In that sacred space, I see my grandfather, among the first wave of Indians arriving on these shores in 1907. Their dreams were carved by hope, their hands by toil. Life unfolded like the rings of a tree. Each year marking trials endured and sacrifices made. In the shadow of towering cedars, my family found roots in a land where every tree tells a tale of resilience. I lived my life amidst the whispers of the lumber, where the echoes of axes tells the story of a struggle, and the scent of sawdust carries the dreams of generations. As I journey back through time, traversing the lanes of memory, I feel the weight of sacrifices made by my grandfather and my father. And in reflection, I ponder, was it worth it? Was my life worth the sacrifices and struggles they endured to secure my future? As I gaze upon the tapestry of my existence, it's not merely my tale alone. It's a narrative of every immigrant who has traversed these sacred lands. In the vast expanse of the world, there exists a phenomenon both ancient and universal: migration. Like the birds that traverse continents in search of new horizons, so too do humans embark on journeys of hope and possibility. Generations of migrants have crossed oceans and continents, seeking refuge, opportunity, and a better life. From the lush valleys of Punjab to the rugged terrain of British Columbia, the migration of Indians to Canada tells a story of resilience and determination. Yet, like the migratory pattern of birds, the journey of immigration is not without its challenges.
I mean, imagine this for a moment, right? You've come from a small rural village in Punjab to the other side of the world in a setting that's very unfamiliar to you, right? So, there's the experience, the Punjabi experience of wheat and sugarcane fields and beautiful weather and sunshine. And then all of a sudden you move to a place where it's snow-covered mountains, an ocean, large rivers, and pine trees as far as you can see. It sounds beautiful, but you can only imagine the shock that people felt. And for me, when I think about that, it's quite personal. My father, he moved from Punjab, India to the UK. And I've done something similar now when I've moved and immigrated, and I didn't understand how hard it really is. So there's the one piece where you look at these pioneers and you think you went through economic hardship. Right? Financially, you probably had a handful of notes in your pocket and a few coins. I can imagine that you didn't speak the language very well of English or write it very well. and you've lost your identity, you've lost your culture, you've lost your sense of who am I. I imagine it's very, very lonely.
Storms of prejudice and discrimination can test the wings of even the strongest spirits. The first set of immigrants from Punjab faced a hostile environment in British Columbia.
When you bring people from a third country, you bring in actually as labor. That's what these people needed actually. They needed folks actually in the labor market. And sooner they started coming in numbers, higher numbers, then there was a reluctance to accept them. In fact, discrimination started from the time even from the workers' union. You know, the International Woodworkers Unions actually comes to my mind. That was the one based out of the U.S. They started, and they had branches all across North America. They started saying that, hey, these people are taking our jobs. I mean, that happens even today.
My grandfather had immigrated from the Punjab to Victoria in 1906. He left Punjab and he had letters from Canada saying there was work available here. They used to get 10 cents an hour working in the lime quarry, and the East Indians lived in a little compound all their own. They cooked their own food. They looked after themselves.
I think in terms of the experience of knowing where am I going, what am I doing, they probably didn't know what was going to happen to them. There was promises that was likely made for them of a better life, a better future. But I'm sure they had no idea what it was like. It's not like they could very quickly pick up the telephone and say, okay, I want to speak to someone. They had to write letters. They left their entire family, right, behind. And what they had in return was an opportunity. So essentially, because they had to make new friends. Those friends they lived with, those friends they laughed with, those friends they cried with, right? And that's just the truth. It was hard. It was difficult.
In the early 1900s, a wave of immigrants from Punjab set sail for distant shores, their dreams anchored in hope, their hearts heavy with the weight of uncertainty. Arriving in Canada, they faced a landscape both foreign and unforgiving, a land that promised opportunity, yet demanded sacrifice. But when they got here, things were tough. People treated them unfairly because they looked different. They couldn't find good jobs, and they weren't allowed to go to the same schools as everyone else. Social, economic, and cultural differences were huge.
I think the first person among 6 who passed away or died was in 1914. And as you know, our customs are that they ought to be cremated. And crematorium here in Vancouver would not allow them to cremate him. So people are really, what do we do with someone who has passed away and you cannot carry out with the cremations at all? So what they decided that they will cremate this individual out in the bush or in the forest. So they, at night and winter times, they went out and cut some wood and took the dead body. Actually had made in fact an arrangement with one of the white guys who actually took the wagon out there and with the corpse on it and gave it to them. Of course, his idea was making a few extra bucks anyway that we're doing that. And as they started to cremate the individual, it started to snow. And such a heavy snowfall that night, apparently that they were having difficulty. How do we really continue with the cremations, And even the matchstick, Ganda Singh writes in that book, they only have one little matchstick left. And they start making kindles, little smaller pieces of wood to really ignite the fire and then cremate. And while that cremation was going on, and couple folks actually hunters showed up on horses. And now these guys were really scared, as if, if they find out, what would the government do? So luckily, the sensor was so cold, they did not realize that. They didn't tell them at all that they were cremating a person. They just basically said, oh, it's too cold, so we're basically warming up. And these guys got off their horses and started warming up themselves, clearly So that's what they were doing. And then eventually they left, and then they decided up relief, basically saying that, okay, fine, that time is gone. So the first few deaths within the community that were cremated out in the forest area, not in the proper crematorium in Vancouver.
They also struggled to keep their culture alive in a place where everything was new and strange. But even in tough times, they stuck together and helped each other out.
Their social experience, I think, would have been amongst them as friends. They protecting their cultural identity, they would have formed very close bonds. Those friends would have probably felt like brothers to them now. And that was their community. And I think that's a good thing. I think those bonds and those relationships that led to further ties today in terms of families have helped kind of create the Punjabi identity here in Canada.
They didn't give up, and they kept going, planting the seeds for a better future.
Mostly it was selling firewood. First of all, they used to have to go cut the wood out in the forest, but then eventually there was a sawmill in Lake Cowichan, Yubo, and he obtained the contract to take all the waste wood from there, and they used to deliver it in rail cars to Victoria. And I'm talking about the Second World War during the 40s and 50s.
Despite the challenges, they made a difference. Their children and grandchildren went on to do great things.
I think if I recall, it could be Mahinder Singh, if I'm not mistaken. But I think it was the first baby ever born actually here. And a lot of people, again, as you would know in the history, were getting married actually to the local girls as well. And a lot of them, quote unquote, I don't put in those terminologies usually when I talk about it, but white girls getting married to the Sikhs actually. And they even became apathetics.
Showing that no matter how hard things get, the human spirit can overcome. And now, let me take you on a journey through the corridors of my own family history, a tale of perseverance, resilience, and the enduring spirit of hope. Well, I've had a very wonderful experience. I was born in Port Alberni at Sprode Lake, where my father worked out at the sawmills in the Alberni Valley. And I was born on March 31st, 1941. And the 40s and 50s, I grew up at a very, I had a great time. And I mixed with everybody, mostly when I was going to school and working and in sports. Mostly there weren't very many Indian folks there. There wasn't many families that were had families here. So mostly with with a white population that I spent my time. Well, my grandfather, he immigrated to Canada in 1907 from Punjab, India. And when he came here, He started working in the mills and started small businesses. But, the main challenges that my grandfather and father had was they were not educated. So they couldn't speak English, write English, communicate in English. They had to learn all of that. They didn't become citizens till 1947, after India gained their independence. And so they had a difficult time, and even buying property, they couldn't buy property either. Most of the time they lived in bunkhouses and in the sawmills where they worked, or if they were doing contracting work or work that they want to do, 90% of the folks during that time were single. And the government here didn't encourage people to bring their families, and they just wanted them to come here, do the labor work, and go back. They didn't even want Indians to settle here at that time, and even after that. So they weren't welcome here in the community. They weren't welcome in the stores. They weren't welcome in the barber shops. They weren't welcome socially in neighborhoods either. So they had to make themselves within their own community and within their own group of people. Well, they didn't have much other than the churches. The Gurdwaras had functions, and they went there, and they went together there, and they mixed and mingled. That the Gurdwara was the main function area that they enjoyed. There was no other things for them at that time. Well, in those early ages, there was hardly 2,000 people here in BC or Canada. I'm talking 1907. So my dad came in 1924, and he was 15 years old, and he came by himself. He was unmarried, and him and my grandfather worked on the Vancouver mainland, on Vancouver Island, in different mills, started little businesses in the forest industry, and just functioned in trucking and milling and contracting for the mill owners around all over Vancouver Island. And they lived not in houses, but in bunkhouses provided by the mill owners. Mill owners would have a Chinese bunkhouse, Japanese bunkhouse, Indian bunkhouses. And they were all single, and they worked, and they did things together, and they, played sports, whatever they did. But it wasn't a mix with local people. They didn't want to mix, but the local people didn't want to mix with them. Well, mostly they cooked and ate their own food. They weren't welcome to go to, restaurants and enjoyed, they ate Indian food. And in the bunkhouses, they would have an Indian cookhouse and an Indian cook, a chef there. And he would cook for them, and the breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And the Japanese would have the same thing, and the Chinese would have the same thing. So the Indians mostly enjoyed Indian food. And it was a cooperative effort, because in the bunkhouses, they all paid a share into it, and they paid the cook for cooking for them. And you can go there and, enjoy your breakfast, lunch. And the mill, it was right on the property. So at lunchtime, you go and have lunch in your bunkhouse. You didn't take your lunch with you, you just ate there. And in the morning, you have breakfast before you go to work. And those days, you're working 10, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week. And the hourly pay was probably 25 to 30 cents an hour, not very much. Because when I started working in the sawmill, my first job, I made $1.32 an hour, and that was in 1959. In those days, earlier days, there were no unions. There were, whatever they paid you, they paid. If you didn't like it, you didn't get a job. Well, I was pretty young. Like, my grandfather passed away when I was only about 5 years old, so I remember very little. So I never really knew much about what he did, or until later on, when I got older, I started asking my dad, what they did and, how they lived and that. And basically, my grandfather never lived in a normal house. And the first house and family he got to live with us when I was born. And my dad bought a house in Port Alberni, and my grandfather lived, and that was the first time both of them ever had a house and lived in a house. And the first house my dad bought was in Port Alberni for $1,500 in, I would think, in 1943 at that time. And when he first moved there, the neighbors didn't really want him to move into that neighborhood. But he proved himself, and we were accepted eventually, and I lived there. And then the sad part is my grandfather passed away in 1943, and I was, 3 or 4 years old. Then my mother passed away when I was only 8 years old. So my dad, he raised us himself, me and my sister. And that was quite a journey. And it was a lucky thing that we had the neighborhood, the friends of his. He didn't have any relatives here. Like, he didn't have brothers, sisters, and relatives that could help him raise us. He raised us himself, hired a housekeeper to look after us, and a couple of his friends, older friends, moved in with us, did the cooking, cleaning, and taught us how to, to cook and that. And we lived at the same address, and all the neighborhood there was white, and they accepted us, me and my sister and my dad. Went to school. I finished my elementary school at 8th Avenue, and finished my high school in 1959 at ADHS, with Albany District High School. And then when I finished my high school education, I went to work in the sawmill down there for 3 years before I went on to university. And my sister got married. But I didn't find any difficulty growing up. Like, my dad was a very outgoing person, very hospitable, and he could speak very good English. He just picked it up, in talking to people, and he could mix with everybody. And he had a wood business. In those days, all the households had either a sawdust stove, a wood stove, or an oil stove. So my dad would buy wood from the mills and deliver wood. He had a route that would sell wood to all the houses. And he was well known in the community, and I got well known in the community. He'd take me with him. And so I had an enjoyable time. I have no complaints how I was raised, how people treated me. The schools were good, and 90% of the people I went, or 95% of the people I went to school with, were all white. And I just didn't feel any different. When my mother passed away, I was 8, and my sister was 6. And all the people were at the funeral. I didn't even know what it was all about. Like, there was hundreds of people, like, we knew from the town and out, that were at the funeral. And we didn't know what happened till years later. He never, ever sat down and explained that she had passed away. And the last time I seen her was my dad took us to the hospital. That was it. Very difficult. But we survived. 1 month they worked day shift, 1 month night shift. But he made sure that he came home for lunch, and he always had somebody there looking after us. We had one of his very good friends was an older person, about my grandfather's age. And when my mother passed away, he just moved in. And he looked after us, did the cooking, cleaning, and made sure clothes
were washed. So my dad raised us himself. Yeah, well, you know the sacrifices my grandfather made and father made, and my dad made sure I got an education. I benefited, my grandchildren, my sons benefited, my grandchildren of the future are all going to benefit by the sacrifices they made, and where I could get a good education and use my then ability to move up. And I worked for a large corporation and moved up to the top job in the mill, and also started my own business for the last 30 years. And we've successfully run the business. And I would never have been able to do that without their sacrifices.
As the sun set on the horizon of Canadian history, the arrival of Punjabi immigrants cast a radiant glow upon the landscape, forever altering the tapestry of this great nation. Through their perseverance, resilience, and unwavering spirit, they left an indelible mark upon the fabric of Canadian society.
I think in many ways, emotionally, maybe economically to some degree, it is the same. But in many ways, it's not. So today's new generation, they have access to more information than they ever had before about what is Canada, what is BC. The pioneers that came here did not have that. They are better educated now, the new immigrants, in terms of speaking and writing English, not necessarily the pioneers. Their sense of family and resources that they can access, they have that now. The pioneers didn't have that. So I think in many ways they have that one leg up. They have the ability to build a very different future and a very much a brighter future. But that doesn't mean that you forget about those pioneers and what they went through. I think we sometimes find it very easy to think that was them, that was their experience, it has nothing to do with me. I don't believe that's true.
While the landscape may have changed, the essence of their journey remained unchanged. A quest for opportunity, a yearning for belonging, and a commitment to building a better tomorrow.
I feel like the problems that we are facing today is this rather than working physically, you know? Like there is definitely physical work here. There is definitely hard work. I have done some 18-hour shifts. I have done some decent amount of work, but I don't think that even compared to other people who've been here before me, like 60 years, 100 years before me. But I feel like at the very digital era, we have problems that are made digitally instead of being. So the struggles of today are mentally, I would say. The people before would have so much physical struggle that they wouldn't even think of being depressed at that point of time, you know? From the grocery stores to the food to being able to see Punjabi written on a bus, to be able to walk and not be harassed, to have an institution in order for someone to listen to your voice. All of these are the things that were done by people who came before us and actually made an impact, made a community in order for us to be able to stand on our own feet and actually be recognized, you know?
Isolated from their families, who were thousands of miles away, these immigrants often found themselves alone in an unfamiliar land.
It was an unplanned decision, but I always wanted to explore more places. So after my high school, I just gave my IELTS exam and I got my visa and I was here in like 6 months. I've seen like many many of my relatives as well as my cousins, they moved to abroad and started their new life and their new journey. So I always curious how to be by ourselves in a different country altogether. So that was the first thought which hit me to move to different country. So because of more opportunities to grow and to know different ideas, to know different point of views of different cultures. So that was the main reason why I wanted to move to different. Lived a very good life back in my home country, but it's just the curiosity to live by myself, to experience that kind of freedom, what it's like to live by myself and, to earn money and to pay bills and to study and to just handle all the things by ourselves in India, which I don't think I would get the chance to explore the potential that I had. So that was the reason that I wanted to move to Canada and just to know my strength and my potential of what I can achieve by myself.
Anyone that wants to come to Canada, I would say, know the history of your ancestors. See the challenges they went through. See what they did for you to enjoy the privileges that you're enjoying today in this country. This is a beautiful country. Laws were not as favorable as they are today. We had to fight. You asked a question, who we're all doing. I've been part of the World Sikh Organization I founded as a founding president in 1984. And it's a human rights organization, despite the fact many people will put a different color on it. And that's fine. And we fought the right to wear actually kakars, for example. We could not, as Amrathai, board a bus or even walk outside with your kirpan, even with you at the start, and you were taunted basically. And those were the difficulties. And the case, we have taken cases right up to the Supreme Court of Canada and won. And today those cases are being quoted actually all over the world. Until then, we used to quote actually Allahabad High Court decision about our Panchakakars, five articles of faith. And today, the world is quoting Canadian Supreme Court's decision to wear 5 articles of faith.
My journey has been marked by moments of joy and moments of sorrow, triumphs and setbacks. But through it all, I have remained steadfast in my commitment to honor the legacy of my ancestors and to forge a path of my own. Was the sacrifice of my grandparents and my father worth it? Did I do justice to the dreams they held dear, to the hopes they dared to cherish? In the depth of my soul, I carry the echoes of their struggles, the whispers of their aspirations, and the silent plea for validation. With every step I take, I tread upon the path they forged with blood, sweat, and tears. It is not the magnitude of our achievements that defines us, but the depth of our commitment to honor the sacrifices of those who came before us. Let's pledge to carry their legacy forward, to stand as a testament to their resilience, and to live a life worthy of their sacrifice.